Hiya, folks, and welcome to Brain Bucket. I'm Skull, and I'm joined here today by my cynical friend here, Bones. How you doing, Bones?
I'm doing pretty good, Skull.
Well, today is going to be our second actual Brain Bucket episode, and we've got something special today. We're going to review not just Solo, but also why Solo and subsequent Star Wars movies fail. Now, before we go there, let's talk about what we liked with Solo. Bones, what did you like about Solo?
I liked Solo himself. Granted, we went into this with a whole lot of baggage. Let's talk about the successes and failures here. I think the successful part of it is that when he was with Chewbacca,
That's right.
It worked. And I think part of that's what we need. We need to see more of those Star Wars references. And I know that they say that's fan service, but in this case, it's about Solo. The other part of it that worked, I think, that you were talking about.
That's right. It was when Lando and Han Solo were interacting. So it's Chewie and Lando. Those are the two things that made this Han Solo work. I love the rivalry between Lando and Han, especially the general interactions and the two card games that they had. Especially how Han loses the first card game when it seems like he's going to win, and he figures out that Lando cheated. Then at the end of the movie, when they have their rematch, he stole the card from him and he out-cheated him. It was glorious and it was beautiful.
I totally agree. I think that Lando, they nailed it.
Yeah,
the actor nailed it.
Donald Glover was perfect for the role.
And also, I liked the interaction with Han and Chewie, especially when they were down in the pit. I thought that was very clever. Obviously, a callback to Jedi.
Yep.
But when he used, and some reviewers didn't like this. They didn't like the fact that he was speaking Wookiee.
I thought it was hilarious.
I did too, and that's the Lord and Miller. And we're going to see a lot of that little Lord and Miller things pop up here. I think there is a deep state in Hollywood.
And we will discuss that later with a certain robotic character that everybody hated.
Okay, so what about the rest of the cast? I mean, I felt that they did a good job, but it just didn't seem to mesh well.
Yeah, I mean, I felt this was a problem of having way too many characters about a movie that's supposed to be about the duo, really. It's supposed to be about Han and Chewie, and all these extra characters just became baggage. And if you notice, they kill off...
Forced in, sort of shoved in, really.
Yeah, when you notice, they killed off the original crew extremely quickly, to the point that it was only Beckett, played by Tallahassee from Zombieland.
The Space Monkey, he was awesome.
That's right, yeah. The Space Monkey was the most interesting, funny character in that movie.
Clearly Rocket.
Yeah,
he was Rocket Raccoon.
Yeah, definitely. We knew his motivations, he was funny, he was witty, he was a generally likable guy, and then he dies.
It's like they felt they needed to up the stakes, I guess. Even though everybody knows that Han's not going to die, unless it's by the hands of Kathleen Kennedy.
At this point, yeah. Another thing I liked about it was the Kessel Run. Now, I'll freely admit, I don't really know how the Kessel Run was explained in Legends. I will look it up after this video is over and, I don't know, make corrections or whatnot. Probably not, but I liked the Kessel Run. It was creative. It was, they made the space whale from Rebels actually kind of scary.
Yeah, it didn't bother me. I know it bothered some. Didn't bother me. I really like that idea. It sort of had that Cthulhu sort of feel to it.
By the way, Bones, you made a comparison of the Kessel Run chase to another movie. What did you call it?
I think we called it Wrath of Kessel Khan.
That's right, because it was basically a kind of retake on the final showdown between Kirk and Khan when their sensors were blind and they were stuck inside the nebula.
Yeah, the nebula, that's right. And it had a very nebulous look to it. And obviously it worked there. And so, again, they play it safe, so they know that it's going to work here. But it's still, it worked for me, it functioned for me, and it felt a little bit of tension. Clearly, because you're trapped into something, you don't know where you're going, and it creates that sort of claustrophobic feel to it. And I think it was a success. It was a success when they were being chased by the TIE fighters and when the Star Destroyer comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
And they were taking them out with the guns and say, I mean, it felt... You know what it felt like?
What?
Rebels.
Yes, it did.
It felt like Rebels. The cartoon show, The Rebels, they had done many of these things, and so there was parts of this movie that really worked. But I feel it was still probably Lord and Miller.
Yeah, but what about the parts that just didn't work? And we know this is going to be a long list, so bear with us, folks. Let's just start from the very top.
References as a checklist.
That's right.
So anytime they referenced something that was Star Wars, they felt they needed to insert it.
Yeah, and they were just throwaway lines, like Beckett said, "Oh yeah, I killed Aura Singh," or the Han Solo's blaster pistol being
Given to him by whoever the guy was. Woody Harrelson.
By Woody Harrelson, yeah. Just given in a very dumb, kind of lame way.
Yeah.
And you could even say that with a lot of the references. They're all just kind of lame.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it was the lightsaber. The lightsaber has a lot more history behind it. His blaster, we have no history behind it other than it was handed over by Woody Harrelson.
Yeah.
And then we're staring at it for a few minutes. Personally, I would have just said, here's the gun, put it away. You also made a reference about Kira.
Daenerys' character in the movie.
Yeah, that she knows, what was it?
Teräs Käsi is a martial arts. It was very famous in Legends that basically allowed a normal dude, good amounts of training, to fight Jedi, basically. And it disappeared with Legends after that was canned by Disney, and they brought it back. But
clearly, yeah.
it was done in such a weird, kind of underwhelming way, and it was kind of a throwaway line. You really didn't need it in it. It didn't play a role in it. It showed for one scene, and then that was it.
I will say this, though. I'm glad that they did, in some cases, reference that, because you don't get anything that with Rey. Rey just knows everything.
Yeah.
You don't really get any of that with honestly all these throwaway characters. The female character that was in Rogue One.
Yeah.
Right.
Jin, whatever.
Yeah, I can't remember her name.
What the hell her name is.
We don't even know why she has all these powers. Why she's so good at what they do. Well, here at least we kind of get a sense that she's had some kind of training.
Yeah,
and that's good.
And on top of that, we mentioned how Han and Lando and Chewie, those three work. They work excellently together. But with all the rest of the characters, with Han when he's alone, it just doesn't work. He doesn't interact all that well with Beckett. He doesn't interact all that well with Kira. When he's actually talking to those two people, he doesn't really act like Han Solo. When he's talking to Chewie and Lando, he is Han Solo all the way in, especially when he has the rivalry with Lando. You can feel him just channeling Harrison Ford perfectly.
And I agree, and I think that some of that's the writing. I think that this guy who's playing Solo, he can definitely pull this off. It's just the writing wasn't there, the directing wasn't there.
Yeah.
I think, again, other references, the Falcon. Well, we've seen the Falcon a ton of times now, so they're running out of references here, folks.
Yes, and on top of that, the action just felt underwhelming. With the notable with the notable exception of like the Kessel Run and stuff like that, it just felt underwhelming. The way it was shot, underwhelming. The way the action happened, underwhelming. You can even say it with this movie. It just was underwhelming.
But what about the blood stripe? Nobody talks about the blood stripe.
For those who don't know, the blood stripe is basically the Carillion Medal of Honor. Han Solo in Legends, before he became an Imperial pilot, was a member of the Carillion military. He got it for fighting with distinction against pirates, basically. And the blood stripe is that red stripe we see on all of the pants he wears throughout the movie. They don't talk about it at all.
Yeah, no, and they just put him right into the Imperial Army. Now, what did you think about when he goes up to get recruited and he gives him his name?
Lame. Why can't he just be Solo? What's the problem with him just having the name Solo? This is Star Wars, for crying out loud. We have people called Skywalker, and such names like that.
I mean, obviously, I guess he was an orphan. Is that what we got from this? I mean,
yeah, he was alone, basically. He had no family, and the guy was just like, okay, you're a Solo dude. But
what if he just came up with it himself? I think
like, I'm Han Solo.
Right, and then that I think that would have made more sense instead of it just kind of, I don't know, the timing was off, the rhythm was off. Now, I think you talked about seeing it through the Imperial eyes once he was in the Imperial Navy.
Yeah, the Imperial Army. We finally got an on-screen depiction of the Imperial Army, which is awesome. And on top of that, they made them look generally cool. For those who don't understand what I mean, the Stormtroopers are not the primary fighting force of the Empire. The Imperial Army is. If the Stormtroopers are the Marines who primarily attack, the Imperial Army are the National Guard or the regular army who come in and primarily occupy or fight in the more begrudging battles. So, finally seeing them there, that was great.
The problem with that is that the insertion, the other reference is checklist, Stormtroopers. There's always got to be Stormtroopers. Why in the world would you have a Special Forces, heavily armored Stormtrooper sitting there taking names from people in line? It just wouldn't happen. You've got specialized people that do these things. So once again, another box checks reference. We don't need that. Now, granted, that did happen in New Hope when they were interviewing Obi-Wan, but it was under military control, and they were searching for droids, so it made sense for them to be there. But in this case, checking recruits as they're going in. It just seemed a little bit kind of silly.
Yeah, and let's talk about the biggest complaint that everybody has in this movie. A certain droid that everyone just despises. What was her name, Bones? What was her name?
1337, I believe. Leet, which it's interesting. I think Leet is, when I talked about sort of there being possibly a deep state inside of Hollywood, well, I think there's a deep state of, it's very similar to people that are trapped in communism, let's say like in Russia, and they want to defect, because ultimately they realize that socialism has failed.
Yes.
I think there are people in Hollywood that realized that it has failed. It's a failed, miserable society that they're living in, and it's coming out in these movies.
And ultimately what we mean by that is this. In the case of Leet, she clearly is a symbol of the socialist movement, causing all this destruction and mayhem in their wake. And when you look at Leet and her overall objective in the movie, her objective is to save droids. That's it. She doesn't care about anybody else. She doesn't care about the Wookiees. She doesn't care about all the other human slaves. All she cares about is freeing the droids. And because of her actions, it endangered the rest of her crew. She was completely blind to the danger all around her. All she cared about was the idea of freeing the droids. And the end result was that because of her blindness to the danger around her, she was killed. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. She was first shot down by a blaster bolt. Lando then had to run out and try and save her. In the process of doing so, he inadvertently tears her in half. So she dies a second time, incredibly horribly. And Lando is even shot for his trouble, so it forces the rest of the crew to go out and basically save him. Then, she is then killed for the 3rd and final time when she is effectively inserted into the Millennium Falcon's navigational system and made a slave to the system that she fought against.
So each one of these deaths, it's, to me, I think it's symbolic. And even the name, we keep calling her Leet. 1337 comes from the Leet language. It was a binary code that came out of the 80s. And it was back when the computer programmers, hackers, and or crackers were trying to communicate with one another. Well, on what was called the message board system, I believe, or bulletin board, I believe. And they had moderators that would catch what they're talking about, and they would shut them down. So they started this numerical code. Leet, or 1337, is because some words are switched around. Eventually Leet formed into things like emoticons, or let's say if you think of the word, if you're going to say ass, and you use the at symbol and you use $2 that's the Leet language. And what Leet means is elite. So if you ever see 1337, and there's other forms of this too, usually there's a 0 or there's multiple 1s and 0s, it just depends, but it means that they are the elite, or they are the higher tier of those hackers. And so obviously clearly they're trying to appeal to people through saying that she is
An elitist.
But also maybe there's something secret here as well.
Ultimately, it comes down to this. It is quite clear at this point that Kathleen Kennedy, the head of all this, is a socialist. She's pushing a socialist agenda. She's pushing a feminist agenda. And Leet is clearly a depiction of this. I would even go so far as to say she is a parody of this because, well, she was made out to be rather ridiculous and she dies quite horribly. And at the end of the day, I think this is Lord and Miller, not Ron Howard, because the way she's shot and kind of the humor she has, she is meant to show us the fallacy of the dream, the fallacy of the socialist utopia idea, that ultimately it is going to fail because of the fact that they are blind to the danger and because of the fact that the dream itself is not humanly possible. And in the case of this droid rebellion, it fails. All the droids are destroyed. The Empire comes in, they subjugate the place. C-3PO mentions how droids were immediately destroyed upon entering Castle. So at the end of the day, the rebellion failed. Alright, Bones, let's wrap this up. Do you have anything else to add with this movie?
I think the biggest point here is that the reason why Disney is failing, the reason why I know that both Skull and I have sat and tried to figure out, why does Kennedy come up with these ideas? Why are they sacrificing it and losing? And they're going to lose all this money. And it's finally happening with Solo. They've lost their fan base.
It's been dropping, basically the movie that he earned back with The Force Awakens, it's dropped 40% with Rogue One, then another 40% with The Last Jedi, and then another 40% with Solo. So clearly, people are wising up, and they're no longer seeing these movies.
Yeah, so why are they doing it? Because it's socialism, because they believe in the socialist idea. And the socialist idea is ultimately, it doesn't matter how much money you have to spend.
It's just a dream.
It's a dream, and they are willing to sacrifice for that dream.
Even though they will never reach it.
And I think the other part of that problem is not just that, but Kennedy was part of what I believe, it really is the perfect storm. She was it was a perfect time. They were clamoring for feminism. They were pushing for putting women in into places of authority, high places of authority. Whether or not, and again, you've seen this in a lot of other socialist ideas, just because you stick people that don't have the experience or the ability to do the job, and you just put them in the job, it doesn't mean they're going to live up to that job. And it's ultimately going to be a failure. And that's what's happened with Kennedy. I think that she knows what she knows, and I'm sure she's a professional, but I don't think that she was ready for this job. And as a result, she has now surrounded herself, very much like Lucas with the prequels.
With yes men.
Surrounded with yes men. And that also includes yes women. And so she's not really seeing, what was a good analogy? It's like in Lord of the Rings. You have Denethor standing on that cliff, and he finally looks down and he sees all the orcs coming to destroy everything he's built. Solo is that moment. I think that they're finally seeing it, and she's finally seeing it, I think. If you surround yourself with yes men that are going to tell you, oh yeah, everything's great, then ultimately you're going to be in a Denethor situation, and everything is coming crashing down. So that is the superstorm. She was swept up in that superstorm, and it has now become a super wave. And that super wave is 100 feet tall, and it is coming for the flagship Disney. And unless they steer that ship into that wave and get through that wave, they're going to bring Disney down. They are going to bring down Lucasfilms. They're going to bring everything down, all based on this ridiculous idea. And the way that they drive that ship through that wave is they need to admit the truth. The truth is that the idea is flawed, that they need to jettison cargo, not to, to do a reference there to Han Solo. They need to jettison KK. And they need to jettison everybody that has these ideas and get back to the fans. Heck, put Mark Hamill in charge, if anything,
Yeah, I can agree. This is a movie that had a great deal of potential. I enjoyed parts of it, but at the end of the day, it was weighed down by its baggage, and it needs to jettison it now.
It is sinking.
Well, thank you for the talk, Bones.
Thank you, Skull.
And this was another episode of Brain Bucket. See you, folks.
Laters.